Hello, and welcome to the New Haven Railroad of the late 1940s or early 50s. It's early morning down here in Stamford, Connecticut, and today we'll be taking our first look at some electric operations, concentrating on the New Haven electric commuter trains on the shoreline stretch into New York City. We are in Train Simulator by Railworks once again, and there isn't enough New Haven equipment available for the game to be able to model a specific year, which is why it has to be more of a general time frame. It's not a specific year, although sometimes I say 1947 for these because I like to get the steam engines in, but it's really sort of a gray area, so we have to use our imagination. Along those same lines, we are also not on the historic New Haven route that I've used in the past. We are actually on the New York-New Haven route for Train Simulator, which is set in modern times. But this is the same trackage that was the New Haven mainline connecting New York to Boston, and we'll find that the tracks, infrastructure, and station stops are very similar, or in some cases the same, as they would have been in the 1950s. In fact, we'll be following the real 1955 train schedule this morning, and 65 years later, we'll find that we can still meet the schedule timing with no problem, and only one station stop has been removed. If you're interested in checking out that schedule or any other further reading, check out the video description below for links to all of my references. It's December 23rd, the Friday before the Christmas weekend, and the happy post-war holiday spirit is in the snowy air this morning. Today we'll be taking local passenger train number 261 from Stamford to Grand Central Station in New York. Once again, using the official 1955 New Haven train schedule, 261 will depart Stamford at 6:30 in the morning and will arrive at Grand Central at 7:38. Alright, let's get rolling this morning. Here we are in the cab, or I guess more accurately the enclosed vestibule of our motor car here in the Mutt. Let's start by getting power into the train. So up here we have our motor controller. We'll switch that to on. So there's power coming into the train now through the pantograph, which is already raised. Cab light is on, and we'll get the headlight on up front as well. Right in front of us here we have our very limited gauge cluster speedometer on the left, and two brake gauges on the right, various controls in front of us. And we'll get the windshield wipers on, and we will release the handbrake, which is over here on the left. So now we're ready to go. The first thing that we're going to want to do this morning is to pull out of the Stamford yards here. So you can see we're going to pull ahead, stop there, set the switches, and then back up to a spot behind us, reset switches so we can pull forward, crossing over the main lines and into the Stamford station. So there we go. Brakes are released. Equalizing pressure is coming back up to full. One click on the throttle is going to start us gently rolling forward. The type of train that we're in today is what is known as an MU, multiple unit, or on the New Haven, MUT, for multiple unit train. The New Haven MUTs were electrically powered, self-propelled commuter rail cars. The first New Haven MUs were numbers 4010 and 4011. Built in 1908 for shuttle service, specifically on the New Canaan branch, they were wooden, open-platform motor cars with AC-only power. Each had a single unpowered trailing car, converted from standard passenger coaches. 4010 burned down in 1910, highlighting the danger of wooden cars on high-voltage lines, and all future MUTs were steel. The success of the two-car electric trains on the Canaan branch prompted the New Haven to invest in a new fleet of MUTs that could handle commuter service all the way into New York City. These new heavyweight motor and trailing cars were built between 1909 and 1931 and included several slightly different classes. They were equipped to be powered by both AC and DC and could make the changeover at speed. They were built by two companies, Osgood-Bradley out of Worcester, Massachusetts, and Standard Steel Car Company out of Butler, PA. 90 motor cars were numbered from 4020 to 4109, and 114 trailer cars ran from 4200 to 4313. In 1923, 3 standard baggage cars were also converted into trailer cars. The heavyweight MUTs worked tirelessly until 1954, when a new batch of MUs were finally ordered by the railroad. These 100 new units were nicknamed washboards because of their corrugated stainless steel bodies, and they included modern comforts like air conditioning, comfortable seats, and fluorescent lighting. The arrival of the washboards saw the retirement of half of the old green Mutt fleet, which continued to dwindle into the 1960s. The last of the green Mutts outlived the New Haven Railroad, coming under Penn Central control after the 1968 merger, and finally being retired in 1973, in favor of the new Bud M2 commuter trains. They lived out their final days working the New Canaan branch or being towed behind FL9s and GG1s. Our lead unit today is 4045, which makes it an Osgood-Bradley car from 1922. The car weighs 87 tons, is 72 feet long, it seats 84 passengers, and is equipped with the Westinghouse 409D electric AC motors with a starting tractive effort of 20,000 pounds. Max speed on level track is around 66 miles an hour. Yard limit has been 10 miles an hour over here by the shops, but once we're clear and pulling forward to the crossovers, we'll be up to 15, so we'll be able to go a little bit faster. Looking out across the main lines of the Stamford tracks, we see some mixed freight out there on the far side along the sidings next to the highway. Oh, and there we have a couple FL9s pulling a passenger train. That's train number 55, heading westbound from New Haven to Grand Central Station. And that was one of the things that I was talking about maybe you have to use your imagination for a little bit, because in real life the FL9s didn't arrive on the New Haven until after 1956. More realistically, we would be seeing one of the all-electric locomotives, maybe the EP 3s or 4s, at this time pulling train number 55, but nowhere are those available for the game, so here in the scenarios we're using the FL9s as a placeholder. If you were imagining that this is a little bit later in the 50s, the heavyweight Mutts would still be on the road, so that would be a little bit more appropriate, but you wouldn't be seeing things like the steam engines that we sometimes see in the scenarios. So we'll have to wait for them to clear before we begin our crossovers. And we're pulling past the switch now that we need to clear. So I'm going to come to a stop. Let's put a few pounds of pressure on the brakes. There's 10 pounds. And we'll come to a stop. While I'm setting the switches into the station, here comes number 55 pulling into Stamford, while the Canaan branch, number N2, is pulling out of Stamford and heading east, where it'll peel off the main road and up onto the branch. We are good to go. Brakes are released and we'll start pulling forward. Now, like I said, up to 15 mile an hour limit, so we can go a little bit faster. And we're going to pull forward until we hit we're going to get a red signal, so we'll pull up short of that and then request permission to cross the mains once 55 clears the station. And we're basically out of the real yard, so we'll kill the bell once we pass this parked train on the left. We should be clear of anyone who might be wandering around the train. Here comes the N2, eastbound, and the New Canaan branch. That is where the first New Haven electrics began their career, running up and down that short stretch. Originally electrified with 600-volt DC. It actually predated the AC system that the New Haven would put in after the turn of the century. And there we go, we're past that train on the left, so bell off. And actually we get a good view here how the yard down to our left is actually at a slightly lower elevation. So we came up an incline as we backed out. Sort of neat to see. Here's a little dwarf showing us green, but you can just see ahead of us we got two vertical reds coming up, so we'll pull short of that. And a little bit of light pressure on the brakes, just 5 pounds. And we will screech to a stop here just short. A little bit more to encourage it. There we go, and pull it down to 50 pounds there. Or actually 10 pounds or 15 pounds of application to hold us in place. We should be fine. And checking the mains behind us, they look clear, so no one's sneaking up behind us. There shouldn't be any trains now. We should have clear rails for at least a few minutes for us to cross over. So let's call in request permission to pass the signal. Request to pass signal is approved, and they just changed the switches up ahead, so we have actually got the green signal. 2 toots on the horn. We're going to pull forward, crossover into the Stamford station. Still maintaining 15 miles an hour limit as we go through these crossovers here. To our left, idling on this siding here, we have a New Haven J-class locomotive. Medium Mikado type freight loco. Again, something that we'd be seeing a little bit earlier if it was the late 40s, but certainly long gone by the mid-50s. Little whistle and bell on for safety as we're pulling into the platform here at Stamford, preparing for our 6:30 departure. We've got a few minutes, about 5 minutes to go. Stamford, Connecticut was the major hub for the railroad between New Haven and New York, as the 33 miles between it and New York City was the busiest section of the entire New Haven Railroad. Stamford was the origin point for the New Haven's multiple unit commuter service, and Stamford Yard's locomotive shop provided a secondary repair and storage facility for the MUTs behind the primary Van Nest shops in Brooklyn. Stamford also saw freight traffic with a small yard that serviced local industry along the main line and up the New Canaan branch. In 1867, when the first Stamford station was built, the railroad was still on ground level, passing through grade crossings in the town. In the 1890s, the track was elevated and the original depot was demolished and replaced. The 1890 station, which consisted of a pair of large gabled passenger buildings on either side of the tracks, remained in service until 1987. The old buildings were then again demolished, and the station received a complete overhaul, being officially renamed the Stamford Transportation Center, as it also incorporated a major bus terminal for Greyhound, Peter Pan, and CT Transit bus lines. The station was again renovated in 2004 to address design and efficiency problems, and this current version is the one that we see here in the game. Today, Stamford is the second busiest station in the entire Metro North network, seeing 8.5 million riders per year. Only Grand Central Terminal is busier. 1 minute till departure, so we'll get the cab ready to go again. Take another quick look around. We've got the Westinghouse air brake gauges on the right, and when I'm looking at those, I'm looking at the two black hands on both gauges, equalizing and actual brake pressure. To the left is our trusty Barco speedometer, which reads up to 80 miles an hour. We've got the brake controls here on the right. Down at the bottom of all the brake pipes, we've got the foot-actuated deadman switch. And like we saw before, we've got the handbrake on the left, the door into the actual cabin of the car. And there we go, 6:30, all aboard. Next stop is Old Greenwich by 6:33. So forward on the reverser, bell on, brakes off, and we're going to pull out of Stamford Station on our way. We have a 3-minute run to Old Greenwich. And this is going to be a 45-mile-an-hour zone once we leave the platform. Out of the station over the Rippewam River down underneath us. And we're just coming up over 40 miles an hour, so pulling the throttle back just a little bit so we can creep up to 45. Not go over it. There we go, we'll just keep us rolling. Stamford out to our right, coming up on the Selleck Street overpass. Here's our first milepost marker. There we go, we just passed it, so now we're in mile 32, which is actually up to a 70-mile-an-hour zone. So we can crank up the speed a little bit, but we can't go overboard because just up ahead I can see the lights of the Old Greenwich station already. So there's no point in going too crazy. In fact, we'll just start coasting here as we are coming over Tomac Street in Greenwich. Going underneath us there, and I've got the brakes on just a little bit. My goal is to hit 30 miles an hour as we pass the incoming edge of the platform. So we'll adjust the brakes a little bit to try to get us down to right around there. Whistle and bell as we're pulling into Old Greenwich. We'll bring it right down here to the end of the platform. So Old Greenwich is the first of 4 stops in the city of Greenwich in Connecticut. And in fact, Old Greenwich is one of 7 neighborhoods or sections of Greenwich. So we're actually going to get Old Greenwich, Riverside, Coes Cobb, and Greenwich Station itself. Those are 4 stops out of the 7 neighborhoods. So an interesting feature of the city that it has so many distinct like census-designated neighborhoods. Okay, passengers are on board Riverside by 6:36, so another 3-minute jaunt to Riverside, which is about a mile away. And we are in a 70-mile-an-hour zone now, so we're going to get on it as we come out of the station, get up to our top speed of around 66 miles an hour. There's 6 clicks, passing 35. Binney Park out to our right in Greenwich with Arch Street right underneath us there as we pass over. Milepost marker, we're now in 31. 70-mile-an-hour zone, Riverside coming up. I'm already seeing the lights for the platforms. So just shy of 60 miles an hour, back to idle. 10 pounds of pressure on the brakes. Again, looking for that 30 miles an hour as we cross the platform. Adjusting the brakes to bring us smoothly down to that 30 and then to a stop eventually at the platform, because we do want to consider passenger comfort. Although if you've ever been on a real train in New York City or Boston, you know that passenger comfort is the last thing that is considered. There we go, there's our 30 miles an hour as we roll onto or into the Riverside platform. That steel bridge in front of us, Riverside Ave, will be going right under that, stopping on the far side. Set our holding brakes at Riverside, and we're about 10 seconds behind schedule. So not too bad so far. Cobb Station by 6:38. So we're going to pull out of here. It's actually going to be a 50-mile-an-hour zone up ahead because we're going to be crossing a bridge. Now, those are modern speed limits, and I think those were enacted fairly recently, within the last 20 or 30 years, because of the age of these bridges. And they've had several crashes on the bridges because of high speed. I think at the time, 40s and 50s, we'd probably be blowing through these at full speed without a care in the world. But we can't do that here in the game because of the set speed limits, so not a big deal. So we'll just hold it at 50. But here we go, coming over the bridge, also hitting milepost 30, and we're now on the Mianus River Bridge. This was opened in 1848 on Christmas Day, so almost 100 years ago to the day from this morning here in the game. Then this was the final section of the New York and New Haven Railroad to be opened, marking the completion of that original railroad in 1848. On our left is the former site of the Cobb Power Plant, built by the New Haven in 1907 to power its overhead wires along its tracks. The coal-fired plant used steam to spin 4 Westinghouse turbine generators for an output of 12,000 kilowatts. The plant was converted from coal to oil in the 1980s, but it was still exceedingly dirty, and with other options available for power, Cobb Power Plant was shut down in 1987. It remained unused until 2000, when it was finally demolished, though a power substation does remain in use. Today, a park and a soccer field occupy the rest of the site. Cobb itself is a section of Greenwich, one of the 7 neighborhoods that I mentioned, and it borders the Mianus River and Long Island Sound. It gets its somewhat unusual name from a man named John Coe, who sailed from England to settle on the bank of the river in the 1640s. He built a small seawall at the mouth of the river to make a safe harbor for small boats. Seawalls were commonly referred to as cobs at the time, so the area became Coe's Cobb. The E and the apostrophe were later dropped, and over time, the town's name eventually morphed into Cobb. Passenger loading complete onto Greenwich by 6:42. And pulling out of Cobb, we're at a 70, or we're in a 70-mile-an-hour zone again. So back up to full speed. We've got a green Mutt oncoming. That's number 326, one of the eastbound morning locals pulling into Cobb. And they are on their way from Grand Central up to Stamford, where the train will terminate. under Indian Field Road now. And we're coming up to speed on this short straight section here, hitting 60 miles an hour. And we'll start pulling the throttle back as we top out. There we go, there's 65, so we're basically at top speed, topping out around 66. We've got Route 95 off to our left now. And we just passed another milepost marker into milepost 29 now, heading for Greenwich. The final stop in Greenwich, which is actually called Greenwich. This is looking out towards the Long Island Sound from an eastern neighborhood that is adjacent to the center of Greenwich, the main street and commercial section, which is now out to our right. And we've got a little bit of a buzzer as we're coming down into the platform here, because there was a slight dip. There's a 50-mile-an-hour zone right before the Greenwich station. We're a little hot coming in now. There we go. There's our 30 miles an hour. But we're heavy on the brakes. We'll release them for a nice gentle stop at the end of the platform. I'll stop Greenwich Station. The station we see here was opened by Penn Central in 1970, one of the few improvements that the railroad actually made during its short life. It replaced an original station on the site built by the New York and New Haven in 1848. A current plan is underway to replace the 50-year-old station for $45 million. On to Portchester now by 6:47. This is a little bit of a longer stretch than we've had. This is going to be about a 3-mile run. We've basically been stopping every mile at a station now. We've got a 3-mile run up at 70 miles an hour with a drop down to 50 at milepost 27. The tracks we're on here were originally the New York and New Haven Railroad, whose merger with the New Haven and Hartford Railroad to the north would form the New York, New Haven, and Hartford, commonly shortened to the Consolidated, or simply the New Haven Railroad. The New York and New Haven first opened in 1848. Because of the geography of Connecticut, it was much easier and cheaper to build railroads that ran north-south. East-west construction required crossing many rivers and valleys, an expensive proposition for small upstart railroads. The primitive railroad technology of the 1830s was also hard-pressed to make such trips through rugged territory. Trains ran on strap rails, wooden rails topped with iron plates. Passenger cars were simply stagecoach bodies mounted on flanged wheels and were strung together with chains. An inch of snow was enough to stop a train on even small grades. Because of all this, the first railroad to cross the state was built upon the relatively flat shoreline, and the New York and New Haven completed the route by acquiring 2 other sections of road, the New Haven and London Railroad, and a section of the New York, Providence, and Boston known as the Shoreline. The New York and New Haven main line now stretched from New York to Providence, Rhode Island. This gave the New York and New Haven enough power to be able to intimidate another neighboring railroad, the New Haven and Hartford, into a full merger in 1871. The post-Civil War boom in railroad technology led to the construction in 1889 of several steel bridges, which eliminated the ferries that had originally carried trains across Connecticut's major rivers. The railroad now offered uninterrupted double-tracked service from Boston to New York in 6 hours, finally achieving its original goal after 40 years of operation. This western section of the shoreline that we're on was upgraded to 4 tracks by 1897, including construction of 5 new drawbridges, and all road crossings were eliminated. The New Haven's next landmark advancement was the introduction of high-voltage electrified tracks. The smoke from trains had become overwhelming in New York, and Manhattan issued prohibitions on steam locomotive use. To meet these rules, the New Haven built the country's first high-voltage AC electric system between Woodlawn, New York, and Stamford, Connecticut, a distance of 22 miles. The New Haven pioneered the use of 11,000-volt overhead catenary wires. Previous electrification systems in the U.S. used much lower voltage DC power, but because of high transmission losses, longer distance mainline travel required a new high-voltage AC system. The New Haven built a coal power plant in Cos Cob, a section of Greenwich, Connecticut, the first to be used exclusively for railroad use. After 1915, additional power was supplied by the Sherman Creek Power Station on the north end of Manhattan Island. Within a few years, the entire stretch from Woodlawn to New Haven and up into the Cedar Hill freight yards was fully electrified. The entire line also boasted an automatic signaling system by 1918. Port Chester is our first stop in the state of New York and is also very interesting because it still uses its original 1890 passenger building. It was built by the New Haven Railroad, and this represents the style of architecture that we would be seeing at all of the stations along this route in the 1950s, though without the passenger overhangs on the platforms. That's much newer. The Port Chester station was recently renovated in both 2009 and again in 2019. Rye by 651. And as we leave the station, we're actually back up in a 70 zone. Although we're not going to stay there for long because it'll be back down to 50 for milepost 25 into Rye, so we won't get too crazy. We'll probably just go up to 50 and hold it there. Again, it's only a mile run, so we'll see how close we actually get. It's pretty straight track on this section, though. Over the top of Boston Post Road. Oh, and there's the milepost marker for 25, so break back down just a little bit down to 50. Yep, there's the buzzer already. We're coming up on the interchange between Route 287 and 95. This overpass here is 287, and 95 is beyond it, crossing over the top of the tracks from left to right. So now the interstate's going to be on our right side as we're coming into the Rye station, which is just around the corner here. Brakes on. And this overpass over the middle of the station is US Route 1, which is what 95 was originally constructed to replace. Route 95 was opened as the Connecticut Turnpike in 1958. It was built to ease congestion along Route 1, the original main road along the Connecticut shore. To avoid opposition from towns along the route, the state guaranteed that each town would have multiple access routes for local drivers' convenience, leading to Route 95's unusually high number of exits in the area. Route 1 is also the longest north-south road in the United States. Laid out in the 1920s, it runs the length of the East Coast from the Canadian border in Maine to Key West, Florida. And we're in great shape schedule-wise. We're actually a minute early. We were scheduled to be here at 6:50:25. We got here at 6:49:25. So we are keeping the schedule nicely. Oops, something coming on our left. Heavy freight rocketing by on our left. Triple unit FA1 led freight on its way to either the Oak Point or Harlem River freight yards. These were the two southernmost freight yards on the New Haven line. From there, the cars would be distributed to either local industry or other railroads for connections. The New Haven moved most of their freight at night, although occasionally during the day you would have a couple of fast freights going to and from, but passenger service was usually so busy, and that was the New Haven's primary moneymaker, was their passenger service. The short-haul freight really didn't make them as much money, so most of that was regulated to nighttime. So we're at just shy of 7 a.m. here, so this is probably one of the last evening freights thundering down to Oak Point. Alright, and as the black caboose zooms by us, we are cleared to Harrison by 6:54. $50-mile-an-hour zone on the far side of Rye here, and actually all the way for the next 2 miles into Harrison, so slightly lower speed section of track. Route 95 still off to our right. Because we've crossed over into New York, that has now become the New York Thruway. And we'll pretty much parallel that on and off all the way down into New Rochelle. Milepost marker 24. And somewhere coming up here soon, there's a pretty interesting structure that's going to be on our right side. And that is an old New Haven-style interlocking tower. It's a gabled 2-story building, and you used to see them dotted up and down the line everywhere on the railroad. They often controlled crossover switches, which is what we've got up here on the other side of the bridge here. We have a crossover section that this tower would have been responsible for at the time. Now, if this really was 1955, it would probably still be in operation. Of course, today everything is automated or operated remotely, so no need for the interlocking towers anymore. They're very rare to find. They've mostly all been torn down. This one is still there, and there's one up in Springfield with the roof cut off. They actually built 91 over the top of it on the west side of the Springfield station, actually at the interchange where the line crosses the river and goes into the West Springfield yards. Building is still there, it just doesn't have a roof because it's underneath the highway. Holding steady at 50 through this straight section, it actually just occurred to me that with all the MGM casino construction up in Springfield that just happened recently, I actually don't know for sure if that old switch house is still there. It might be gone if they did major renovations and changes to the highway, which is what they were working on. I haven't been up there in a while to see. So I might be incorrect. That old interlocking tower might be gone now. And here comes the platform just around this curve to the right. So I'm on the brakes already. There we go, I can see it clearly now. Ease up on the brakes just a little bit. Bell on for safety as we cross over the edge of the platform. Bring it down to a halt here at a fairly modern looking Harrison station, although that's an older building out there across the parking lot. And we're being passed on the left by another FL9-led express train. That's number 125, the State of Maine. That's actually one of the New Haven's named trains. And they're on their way into Grand Central Station for 7:30. They left New Haven at 5:50 in the morning after coming from Providence, Rhode Island at 3:25. So they've been running all morning from Providence, and I assume prior to that, probably coming down from Maine. So the State of Maine, one of the red-eye trains into Grand Central. All right, all aboard Mamaroneck by 6:57. We have a 2-mile run now back into a 70 zone. So full speed for the next 2 miles down to the next station. Under the Route 127 bridge. There's milepost 22. And we are crossing 60. Coming up to full speed. And I see the platform lights just up ahead. We're crossing milepost 21. We're right there, so back down to idle. Start putting the brakes on as we come into Mamaroneck. Mamaroneck is another station with one of its original buildings, and in fact, this station house is the second oldest remaining on the New Haven line today. It was built in 1888 by the New Haven to replace the original New York and New Haven that had burned down. Let's check in on our schedule here. So we were scheduled to be here at 56:25. We got here at 57:19. So we're a little bit behind by a few seconds. But we're still here before our assigned departure time. That's really what's important. The arrival time, that is a calculated arrival time with a 45-second station stop built in. All right, Larchmont by 7:01. So slightly faster stop here, but we're on our way again, pulling out into an 80-mile-an-hour zone now. So high-speed section, which again we're not going to reach, just getting up to 65. Over Mamaroneck Avenue down below us there, stretching off to the right into the center of town. Up over 30 as we're hard on the throttle. 6 clicks now. We'll put it up to 8. So throttle wide open. We'll back it off 1. Up over 50, passing milepost 20. Still an 80-mile-an-hour zone. On our right, after these what looks like residential areas, we're actually going to be coming up on a small industrial spur. The Mamaroneck industrial sidings. Some local businesses have a siding off of the main line here, which has been there since, the 40s or 50s at least, so we would be seeing that at this time, I believe. We just passed the marker for milepost 19. As I go back to idle, put the brakes on. There's Larchmont up ahead. Milepost 19. We just passed. Oh, I know what it was. For some reason, there's 2 milepost 20s back there by the industrial sidings, which is always confusing because you can't always see what the far left one is. But so it was 2020. So we just passed the real 19 just prior to coming into the platform here. So Larchmont is an interesting station. The highway is actually just to our right there on the other side of that wall. The highway runs underneath the parking area, which you can see the Weaver Street Bridge up there in front of us crosses over into the parking area, which is over the highway, short tunnel. Highway comes back out basically on the other side of the station and heads into what used to be a large toll plaza. New Rochelle by 7:06. So we are moving right along. We're on to New Rochelle already. Here comes another FL9 lead passenger train coming towards us. That's number 62, heading to New Haven for 8 o'clock. We see a mix of classic green New Haven liveries and the black and red Mianus liveries, which was definitely something that was seen following the Mianus years. You just had a hodgepodge of the many, many different paint schemes of the New Haven. So here's that toll plaza coming up on our right, New York Thruway. Like I said, 95, obviously not the Connecticut Turnpike anymore. Once we crossed into New York, it became the Thruway. This toll plaza, now long gone, doesn't exist anymore. And here comes another eastbound local. This is number 262. Departing Grand Central at 6:30. They'll be at Stamford by 7:39. Coming around the corner here into the straight bit, we've got another crossover interlocking area, so we're down to 50 miles an hour. There's the buzzer, because I was a little late on it. Okay, we're good now. 50 miles an hour. We are coming into the New Rochelle yards now, with the station just beyond it. And we see a bunch of crossover tracks here and a bunch of sidings out on our left. In the 1950s, this place would be even more lively. We'd be seeing a medium-sized freight yard out there on our left. Around 12 tracks would be under where these buildings now are. We're also now coming into the oldest station still standing on the New Haven line, New Rochelle. It was built in 1887, 1 year before Mamaroneck, once again replacing an original New York and New Haven 1848 building. The station was fully renovated in 1990, restoring its interior to reflect historical New Haven stations. The original parts of the station have been added to the National Register of Historic Places. We pull up under the Memorial Highway Bridge as we come to the edge of the New Rochelle ramp. New Rochelle was known as the Junction on the New Haven, as just up ahead the tracks fork into two important directions. Splitting off to the left from the main line is the 11-mile-long Harlem River branch. Six-tracked by 1912, this line led to the New Haven's Oak Point and Harlem River freight yards. Barges, pushed by the New Haven's fleet of tugboats, carried rail cars to points around the city and across the river to New Jersey, where connections to railroads to the west and south were made. The Harlem River branch also connected to the Pennsylvania Railroad via Penn Station, which opened in 1910. The branch runs over the massive Hell Gate Bridge, built by the New Haven and still in operation today. Heavyweight mutts like ours rarely traveled over the Hell Gate, as they mostly did not go into Pennsylvania Station, but occasionally they were spotted doing so on railfan trips through the 1950s. All right, all aboard Pelham by 7:09. Gonna be about a mile away, so we release the brakes. And there's the sound of the air compressor kicking on to replenish our reservoir. As we pull out of New Rochelle and we head towards the junction. Under Division Street. Just on the far side of Center Ave is going to be the junction. We'll try to take a look at it as we come by. I can see the... there it is. I can see the round-style signals on the far side, so that curves off to the left, goes over the Hellgate Bridge and heads down to Penn Station, as well as the 2 freight yards at Harlem River and Oak Point. But of course, we're not going that way this day. We are staying on the main line to Woodlawn, and then onward to Grand Central Station, so we'll be staying to the right. We're over 2nd Street, right there. Mile marker 16 now, still 50-mile-an-hour zone. So actually we'll bring the throttle back as we creep up to 50. Pelham's going to be just ahead. There we go, I can see the platform up ahead, so we'll start coasting our way down. Now, the interesting thing about Pelham is that on the far side of the station is that lost station stop that I was talking about earlier. So between Pelham and Mount Vernon used to be another station at Columbus Avenue, which our timetable has a scheduled stop for, but of course it's not there now, so that actually gives us an extra 2 minutes to get to Mount Vernon. The reason for that station originally was that it provided a connection between the New Haven, which we are on, and yet another railroad in the area, the New York, Westchester, and Boston Railway. Now, I could probably do an entire episode on that railway alone, because it's pretty convoluted, but basically it was a New Haven-owned subsidiary that was originally built to compete with the New York Central for low-fare commuter service within the Bronx and up to Westchester. The railway ran from 1912 until 1937, when it went into bankruptcy and was liquidated. The 4 tracks of the New York, Westchester, and Boston crossed under the New Haven 4 tracks just before Columbus Street, and I'll point it out as we pass, because you would never know it today. The tracks lay abandoned through the 1940s, and by 1956 they were all pulled up. The only portion that still remains is the elevated metro line from Eastchester down to the Van Nest Yards in the Bronx. The Columbus Street station remained in service on the New Haven line at least until 1955, disappearing sometime after that, as the regular Mount Vernon station, which is essentially right next door, could no doubt service the entire area. Alright, clear to Mount Vernon by 7:14. Reverser forward. Let's come off the brakes and pull out of Pelham Station, and we'll start looking for these landmarks as we go by, because there's a lot going on in this little stretch between these stations. So just beyond the platform, here's 5th Avenue that we're passing over, and it stretches off down to the south there, past those commercial buildings. Just beyond it is milepost 15. Then, coming up, we've got a little viaduct here. We're going to be passing over the Hutchinson River Parkway and the Hutchinson River itself. So that's right there. And there's the 3rd Rail DC starting down below us as well. Right up ahead of us, just before this curve, we're going to be passing over Bradford Street. And then just beyond that is going to be the crossing with the New York, Westchester, and Boston. Coming through this left curve, there's going to be a line of houses on our right along Lorraine Terrace, and that line of houses is built right on the old right-of-way for the New York, Westchester, and Boston. And in real life, there would be a little viaduct where those tracks passed under our tracks just before the Columbus Avenue Bridge. Just coming into this curve now, we'd be crossing over the other tracks, and they'd be leading off to our left down to the south, down into the Bronx. And then just up ahead here, as we come into the straight bit, here is Columbus Avenue, and there would have been a station right here for us to stop at. And Columbus Avenue leads up into the middle of town there, And of course there's nothing here now, and you would never know that there's a station. Other than, here's Mount Vernon immediately coming around the corner. As the North Fulton Avenue steel bridge comes into view, we start slowing down for Mount Vernon. .10 miles an hour, coming up on the end of the platform. Mount Vernon East, right next to the sign. Doors are open, neutral, and we are... Yeah, see, we're like 2 minutes ahead of time. So we'll be here for a few minutes. Taking a look down at the third rail, here are the DC pickups attached to the trucks. Like I said earlier, when we were talking about the MUTs, they were designed to be able to switch between the two power sources on the fly. So while moving, all of the motor carriages in the train would be able to automatically switch over from AC to DC. And these little pickups would not be out all the time. They would fold out and lock into place as the pantograph was folding down up on the roof. And that's not exactly modeled in the game. This is an older model. So lowering the pantograph actually cuts off all electricity to the train. So it's got to stay up even though there's not going to be overhead wires anymore and we're running on DC. But we are now on that third rail power for the rest of the way into New York. Okay, passengers are on board. Long run now to the 125th Street station in Harlem by 7:28. So here we go. Forward on the reverser, release the brakes. And we're pulling out of Mount Vernon. We've got 8 miles to go until Harlem. So our longest stretch so far. This is actually our last stop on the New Haven route. Only 2 more stops remaining on the run this morning, and that is 125th Street and then Grand Central itself, and both of those were technically on New York Central tracks. Past the Mount Vernon public parking lot over to our right, we are still in the town or city of Mount Vernon for a little while longer. We're alongside West 1st Street over on our right. We'll parallel that as we head down into this cut, keeping us below street level through the rest of the town. Through a short tunnel now under this parking garage, and these tracks have been lowered like this since at least 1876. This cut has been here. And they lowered these tracks to get them off a street level because the volume of trains was increasing so much that it was causing problems with accidents at all the grade crossings, and it was faster for the trains and more convenient for pedestrians trying to cross the tracks. We've got the Woodlawn Crossover coming up. There's milepost 13, so we're down to we're coming down to 45 miles an hour for the crossover. So, of course, now in modern day, this is all Metro North. It's all the same system. But in this time period that we are pretending to be in today, 40s and 50s, this is the end of the New Haven tracks, and this crossover puts us on the New York and Harlem or New York Central tracks, and then we've got trackage rights the rest of the way down into Grand Central Station. This is also where the original crossover was from the overhead catenary to the third rail DC, and you can see we've actually still got the catenary structures in place. There they go, they just disappeared. So probably right now we'd be on third rail. There's the main line heading up to the north. And out to our left there, also in the crossover, heading towards us, train number 64 on its way to New Haven for 8:43, loaded up with Osgood-Bradley coaches, same company that made our MUT. They also made coaches for the New Haven. jockeying the brakes here to keep us below 45 because of the elevation changes. There's milepost 12. This is Woodlawn Station, right here. And we're on the inner tracks now because we are making no more local stops. That is all the responsibility of the New York Central at this point out. So we are 70 miles an hour on the far side of Woodlawn. So up we go. Another train coming towards us now. This is New York Central number 507 on the Harlem Division, which is what these tracks are known as. Again, we don't have any New York Central equipment available in the game, so the New York Central electric locomotive is being represented by Pennsylvania GG1 and Pensy coaches. Off to our right now, we're passing the massive Woodlawn Cemetary in the Bronx. It covers 400 acres and holds over 300,000 people. It was first opened in 1863, and notable people interred there include Herman Melville, Irving Berlin, Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, and Roland Macy, founder of Macy's department store. A later owner of Macy's, after the Macy family had sold it, is also in Woodlawn. Isidore Straus was a businessman and U.S. congressman and is one of the 12 Titanic passengers buried there, the most of any U.S. cemetery. It also contains 7 British and Canadian soldiers and pilots from both World Wars. In 2011, the cemetery was designated a National Historic Landmark. We have now crossed over and merged onto the New York Central Harlem Division. This was once the New York and Harlem Railroad before it was bought by Cornelius Vanderbilt and merged with the New York Central. The New York Central tracks were electrified from Grand Central Station north to White Plains, where New York Central had a huge yard for transferring trains from electric to steam or diesel, and then the route continued north to Brewster and ultimately Albany. Woodlawn marks the end of the New Haven's tracks, with the last 13 miles into New York City run on the New York Central. These track rights actually predate the New Haven Railroad, as it was the precursor, New York and New Haven, who had made the agreement with the New York and Harlem in 1848. Trains originally used a station deep in Manhattan on 27th Street, before all railroads relocated to the new Grand Central Depot on 42nd Street in the 1870s. New York City area tracks are electrified with low-voltage DC power, requiring that all New Haven locomotives be equipped for both overhead AC power and underrunning third-rail DC. Electricity for the New York tracks came from 2 power plants built in 1906, one on the East River in Port Morris and the other on the Hudson River in the Glenwood section of Yonkers. They both produced 11,000-volt AC, which was sent to various converting stations around the city, which then knocked it down to the necessary 600-volt DC for use on the line. Supplemental power also came from the New Haven Railroad during peak traffic times. In the first half of the 20th century, a total of 11 power plants provided electricity to 9 different surface, subway, elevated, interurban, and long-distance railroads in New York City. This includes the New Haven's Cos Cob plant. And there we go, we actually just passed the milepost 9. So we're up to a 75 zone now. So wide open on the throttle, we'll get a couple more miles per hour. Out of this old girl, we'll get up to 66 and then put it back on cruise setting. But that's it, we're just firewalled now until we get down to the Harlem River Bridge. There we go, milepost 8. Now, still in a 75. Charging through the Tremont station. You can see the pantographs still up. Like I said, we gotta keep them up, otherwise we actually lose power, but they should be down. They would have automatically switched down back at Mount Vernon when the DC shoes came out. We just unfortunately can't do it here on the model in the game. Some more industrial sidings off to our right here. You can see the dwarf signal and the switch coming off the main line. So you would have freight operations along these bits of of high-speed passenger main line. Some of these local businesses. You get various freight locomotives from the New Haven and New York Central, running cars back and forth into these little sidings. We're down to a 60 mile an hour again here in milepost 7. We've got a sharp curve coming up. Semi-sharp curve. And then on the far side of that, we're not too far away from the Harlem River Bridge, which is going to be a real slow speed limit. We'll be down to 40 and actually 35 for crossing the bridge once we get there. We're passing by Melrose Station now and going into the tunnel under 161st Street. We are also underneath Park Avenue, which we've been running alongside now for miles, all the way since Fordham Street, down in this cut. Park Avenue has been up on either side as we make our way down into New York. When we emerge from this tunnel, on our right would be the Mott Haven train yards, which are no longer there. We won't see them in the game. But these massive yards were the location of the New York Central's service facility for long-distance passenger trains in the New York City area. The railroad's premier long-distance trains would be towed backwards out of Grand Central Terminal, back up to Mott Haven, where they would be cleaned and serviced for their next departure. The yards were mostly overbuilt in the 1960s after the air rights were sold. In 1968, with the creation of the Penn Central and Amtrak looming ahead, the yards were completely removed, with their work shifted to yard and station tracks in Grand Central itself. Mott Haven was also the location of the Y that split the New York Central main lines between the Harlem Division, which we are on, and the water level route, which is off to our right. The water level route was the line that followed the Hudson River between New York and Albany, before heading west to Buffalo and beyond. The Hudson Valley was considered to have the most beautiful scenery of the entire railroad. We are coming up on the Harlem River Lift Bridge, also called the Park Avenue Bridge, and as we cross the river, we leave the Bronx and enter Manhattan Island. The lift bridge we see here is the fourth bridge at this site. This one was opened by the New York Central in 1956. The bridge it replaced had been the very first four-track drawbridge in the U.S., built in 1897. The New York and Harlem railroad tracks have been running over viaducts and through cuts through the city as early as 1876, when the railroad rebuilt the line to increase speed and reduce accidents. The 1897 project, known as the Park Avenue Improvement, replaced the original stone viaduct with the current steel one, built the four-track drawbridge, and replaced a small dingy station at 125th Street with the current elevated one that we're now pulling into. This is called the Park Avenue Main Line, which runs for 5 miles over the Park Avenue Viaduct and through the Park Avenue Tunnel into Grand Central. The tunnel was refurbished in 1990, and the viaduct repaired in 1998 for a grand total of $164 million. Only the 125th Street station survives today, but originally another viaduct station existed at 110th Street. And the tunnel had 3 underground station stops. After around 30 years of service, all were closed by 1906. The tunnel platforms at 59th, 72nd, and 86th Streets can still be seen today and are used for storage and emergency exits by Metro North. And we are we're exactly a minute early into 125th Street, so we'll have about a minute and 45 seconds here. Got here a little ahead of schedule. Up next, Grand Central Terminal Track 33 by 7:38 in the morning. And that'll be our final stop. 5 miles left on the trip. And we're at a 35 until we get up to this milepost marker. And then we're back up to 60 for the rest of the run down into the Park Ave Tunnel. Now that we're nearly there, it's time to talk about our famous destination, Grand Central. Grand Central Terminal was built by the New York Central Railroad over a period of 10 years, opening in 1913 as one of the largest train terminals in the world. Train service first began into the city in 1831 with the New York and Harlem Railroad. By 1854, the Hudson River and New Haven railroads had started coming into the city as well, and soot and smoke from all of the train activity prompted New York to ban steam locomotives below 42nd Street. Trains would uncouple their engines at 42nd Street and tow the passenger cars by horse to the various terminals throughout the city. The New York and New Haven station was located at 27th Street. The Hudson and Harlem Railroads, now both owned by transport tycoon Cornelius Vanderbilt, made an agreement with the New Haven to build a joint transit hub for better efficiency. And in 1871, the Grand Central Depot opened on 42nd Street. The building had 3 ornate towers representing the 3 railroads. Through the rest of the 1800s, the depot was added on as train traffic quadrupled. A massive central platform was built in the European style, with a curving steel and glass roof that covered 7 tracks. Trains began running underground to reach the station after 1874, when accidents with pedestrians prompted construction to allow trains to descend into the Park Avenue Tunnel and reach the depot below the streets. In 1902, locomotive smoke obscured a signal in the Park Avenue Tunnel, and 2 trains collided, killing 15 and injuring 30. This crash led to the banning of all steam engines in the city and the electrification of the tracks. The outdated Grand Central Depot, along with its problems of overcrowding and inefficiency, also lacked the infrastructure necessary for electric rails. So, Vanderbilt and the New York Central Railroad contracted the architects of Reed and Stem and Warren and Wetmore to build a massive, modern station. Between 1903 and 1913, the old depot was demolished, and in its place, the current Grand Central Terminal was built. Grand Central's busiest year was 1947, with over 65 million people traveling through the station. That was equivalent to 40% of the entire population of the United States at the time. The station opened with 123 tracks, split between 2 subterranean levels. During the collapse of railroading in the 1960s, Grand Central was saved from destruction after the equally historic Penn Station was demolished. The public outrage over that event motivated the city to declare Grand Central a historic landmark in 1967, refusing to let Penn Central Railroad destroy it and sell the air rights. After the Penn Central's demise and the Amtrak age began, the station fell into disrepair through the 1970s and 80s, but in 1990 received a massive restoration. The station has continued to receive upgrades and revitalization, and is today one of the 10 most visited tourist attractions in the world. We've got Park Avenue rising above us, flanking either side of the tunnel entrance, under the cross street at 97th Street, and we are in the Park Avenue Tunnel. Wipers off, we don't need those anymore. We're just maintaining 60 miles an hour. Let's reach up and click the cab light back on. You can see how it illuminates the bricks just whizzing by at 60 miles an hour. So this is the tunnel where that horrendous crash occurred that caused Manhattan to ban steam trains completely from the city. And can you imagine this tunnel being filled with steam trains all day long? That would have been a scary prospect. I've just got the power at idle now, and we're gonna coast in towards the terminal. I'm keeping an eye out for signals. Once I start seeing signals, which I can just barely see up there, We're going to start applying the brakes because we're dropping from a 60 down to a 15 mile an hour zone at the 1 mile mark. So let's start getting us down there. I can see the red signal's a little bit more clear, so this is close enough. We're at 25 now, and I see a headlight up ahead as well. So we've got something coming towards us, and I've got a red signal up ahead anyways. There's 15 miles an hour, and we're just going to coast down to that signal and stop, and wait for the tracks to clear for us. Now this train coming towards us, this is New Haven number 6, the Mayflower, another named train. And they are on their way. They're leaving from Grand Central at 7:30, and they're going to stop at New Haven, eventually reaching Boston by 11:30 in the morning. So not only is this one of the New Haven's named trains, but it's also one of their flagship trains because it's on the shoreline route out to Boston. So from New York to New Haven to Providence, and then up to South Station in Boston, where the line terminates. Alright, looks pretty clear on the other side, so we're going to call in, request permission to pass by this red signal. And we are approved to pass, although it's still at red. We are allowed to go past it. So let's go ahead and do that, although there's another red signal on the far side, so we'll keep it nice and slow. Make sure we can get past that one too. Just on our left here, that is one of the original stations. That's the platform for the original 52nd Street station that is no longer in use. It was closed down in 1908. There should be another one on the other side, although it's not here in the game, but there's those two, and then the two stations behind us. And here's number 264, another MUT. Local commuter train on its way to Stamford. Two MUTs passing in the night. And we are cleared into track 33, even though we do have this red signal here. We do have permission to cross, so we're just going to ease on by. And all the switches are set by the interlocking operators. And we're going to proceed into our berth for our final stop of the morning run. Limit of 15 still through this station. Here on our left, we've got the tracks that actually lead down to the second or lower level of Grand Central, which, as a commuter train, is actually where we should be going. All of the commuter trains, all of the MUTs, would go to the second subterranean level down underneath, and there's 4 different tracks that would get you there. But here in the game, the lower level is not modeled. It just goes down to some portals and basically nothingness. So we're pulling into the top here. Track 33 is just right of center. So we're just going a couple stalls over a few of these interchanges, and we'll be in where we're supposed to be in just a second here. There, we've got the green signal now. And here we are, pulling in on time, 7:38 in the morning, 1 hour and 8 minutes since departing Stamford Station. We pull into our final destination, Grand Central Terminal, New York City. And we've been on time the whole time. This is modern tracks, but using a 1955 timetable, and we were able to maintain our time basically exact, the whole way through. Sort of proving again that the modern trackage is very little changed from 1955 and even slightly before, even some of the 40s, through most of the 20th century, honestly. Another New York Central / Pennsylvania stand-in train out to our right, and several of the New Haven trains that passed us earlier off to the left. And we're coming to the very end here. Rail bumper up ahead. And ease it down to a stop. Doors are open, and there they go. Passengers are out. They'd be proceeding out past us on the left, up the little ramp, to that back wall and over to the right, where the entranceway to the tracks are. And then they'd be proceeding from there into the ornate waiting room of Grand Central Station itself. So here we are, end of the line. Let's start shutting down the train. So headlights are off. We'll set the brakes. Our final text message reads, "Congratulations, we've made it to New York. Take a few minutes to have a smoke, and then we'll get set up for the return trip." So that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this early morning run into New York and exploring some of the history of the electric side of the New Haven Railroad, as well as the history of the New Haven to New York line itself.